All rise. The Circuit Court of Jefferson County, Alabama is now in session. Honorable Judge Means presiding. All those who have business before the court, draw near and give attention.
Good morning. Please be seated. Clerk, please call the first case.
Case number 2726C359, Alabama State Board of Education versus Thomas Worthwhile.
Appearances for the record.
It's Joseph Cromwell for the plaintiff, Your Honor.
Thomas Worthwhile, Your Honor, appearing pro se if it pleases the court.
Mr. Worthwhile, you intend to represent yourself? Are you aware of your right to counsel under the Sixth Amendment?
I am quite aware of my constitutional rights, Your Honor, and I have also consulted with my union representative on the matter. While I do not doubt that appointed counsel is a right and goodly defender, what is being tried here is not my credentials, but my character. Not my conduct, but my intent. And intent cannot be delegated. It cannot be paraphrased, it must be spoken by the one who holds it. Audi altrum partem. No man shall be condemned unheard. And in this instance, I believe the only right and proper way for me to be heard is to speak for myself.
Mr. Worthwhile, I assure you, this certainly does not please the court. However, that being said, the right to proceed pro se is recognized. If you are knowingly and voluntarily waiving your right to counsel, the court will permit it. Let it be known, Mr. Worthwhile, that you will be held to the same standards as any licensed attorney appearing before this here court. The rules of procedure and evidence will not be relaxed on your behalf. Ignorantia juris non excusat.
Ignorance of the law is no excuse. I understand, Your Honor.
Very well. Counsel for the plaintiff, you may proceed with your opening statement.
Now, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I do pray we are not wasting your time here. But I'm afraid that this is at its core a rather simple matter. See, Mr. Worthwhile would have you believe that he stands here today as some sort of principled educator, as a man of conviction, as a man of truth, and as a man of responsibility. And that is what this is about. This case is about responsibility. Now, as an educator, Thomas Worthwhile was entrusted to teach the youth of Jefferson County. With that trust comes obligation, not merely to inform, but to do so in a manner that is appropriate, measured, and mindful of the environment in which his students are learning. Instead, he chose to introduce material that is, by its very nature, divisive, not educationally necessary, not professionally appropriate, and most certainly not conducive to the learning environment he was entrusted to maintain. Purely and unequivocally divisive. Now, I do not believe there is much room for interpretation there. You will hear testimony that his instruction created discomfort, that it fostered tension, that it disrupted the learning environment he was hired to maintain, that it has caused irreparable damage to the very institution of education he claims to be a stalwart defender of. Damage that cannot simply be walked back by good intentions after the fact. Now, Mr. Worthwhile has elected to represent himself, as is his right. Bless his heart. That is not evidence of righteousness. It is not evidence of truth. And it is most certainly not a substitute for accountability. At the conclusion of this case, we will ask you to return a verdict that reflects the simple reality that has been before you from the very beginning. That Mr. Worthwhile failed his duty not only to his students, but to the educational system he was entrusted to serve. That his actions were not justified and certainly not necessary. That the consequences of those actions were both warranted and necessary.
Mr. Worthwhile, your opening statements, if you could.
Thank you, Your Honor. Members of the jury, good morning. Thank you for your time. I want to begin with what may seem a controversial statement, if you'll indulge me. I agree with counsel for the plaintiff, albeit on only two particular points. First, this case is simple. But simple is not the same as accurate, and it is far from the same as true. You've been told that this case is about responsibility, and therein lies my second point of agreement. Because responsibility is, in fact, the beating heart of what we are discussing here. The question before you is not whether I hold responsibility, but how it is defined, and who is allowed to define it. I stand before you accused of being divisive. Not negligent, not abusive, not incompetent. Divisive. And I suspect that word will be used often in the days ahead. Now you may also be wondering why I stand here alone. Why I've chosen to represent myself when, as both Mr. Cromwell and the court have so carefully noted, it is my constitutional right to have formal representation. That is a fair question, deserving of a direct answer. I'm a teacher. My profession's not built on speaking for others, but on teaching others how to speak for themselves. And I would find it difficult, nigh impossible, to ask my pupils to think critically, to question what they're told, to examine the words placed before them if, upon finding myself in a similar position, I chose not to do the same. What is being examined in this room is not simply what I taught, or even how I taught it. It is the why. An intent, as I have stated, is not something that can be outsourced, summarized, softened, or delegated. It must be stated as plain as the nose on your face, laid bare by the person who holds it. I am that person, not a defense attorney, no matter how goodly and just they may be. And if my choice seems unwise, I would remind you that proceeding pro se is also my constitutional right as recognized by the court in Ferretta v. California. Now, if I am to answer for my supposed crime, we must begin by understanding it. Because the word you've heard, and will continue to hear, is divisive. And I believe that it is time we define it, for the charges leveled against me are, by their very nature, rhetorical. Divisive is a word that, in recent years, has come to describe not falsehood, but discomfort. Not inaccuracy, but disagreement. Not harm, but the presence of difficult truths. There's a principle in law. Nocitur a socis. A word is known by the company it keeps. And I would ask you to consider the company this word has kept. It's placed beside terms like inappropriate, dangerous, unnecessary. It's not invoked to clarify meaning, but to signal disapproval. It implies something ought not be engaged with, without ever needing to justify a why. A lesson on slavery becomes divisive. A discussion of the Holocaust becomes divisive. A novel that asks students to confront injustice, inequality, or historical suffering becomes divisive. Not because these subjects lack truth, but because they demand reflection. You see, the very concept of critical thinking becomes divisive. Which raises the question, cui bono? Who benefits from defining it in such a way? Education is the pursuit of knowledge. All knowledge, not the neutered moments and manicured maxims meant only to preserve our comfort. If the standard for what may be taught is not truth, nor accuracy, nor intellectual rigor, but instead the abject avoidance of discomfort, then we are no longer engaged in education. We are engaged in dilution, or worse, omission. An omission left unchecked has dire consequences. We needn't look far to understand that those who cannot remember history are condemned to repeat it. So if presenting truth, in full and without dilution, is to be called divisive, then I am guilty. If asking students to confront uncomfortable realities is to be deemed inappropriate, then I am guilty. If refusing to omit or falsify history for the sake of comfort is to be considered dangerous, then I am guilty. But let me be clear about what that guilt represents. It is not negligence, nor misconduct, nor harm. It is the refusal to pretend that encouraging critical thinking is tantamount to torture. It is the repudiation that the belief that comfort is paramount to truth. And if that is the charge before this court, then I stand guilty of teaching honestly.